Aloysia Weber. Maria Aloysia Antonia Weber Lange, 1768 June 1839, was a German soprano, remembered primarily for her association with the composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Biography. Born in Zell im Wiesental, Aloysia Weber was one of the 4 daughters of the musical Weber family. Her mother was Cecilia Weber, née Stam. Her father, Fridolin Weber, worked as a prompter and music copyist. Her 3 sisters were soprano Josepha Weber (1758–1819), who promoted the role of the Queen of the Night in Mozart's The Magic Flute, Constance Weber, the wife of Mozart, and Sophie Weber. Her half-first cousin was the composer Karl Maria von Weber. Shortly after her birth, the family moved to Mannheim and Aloysia grew up there. She moved to Munich in 1778, where she made her operatic debut. Her salary at the court theatre was 1,000 florins per year. Her father made 600. The following year, she was engaged to sing in the National Singspiel in Vienna, a project of the Emperor Joseph Roman II. The family moved together to Vienna in September, where the father worked briefly as a ticket taker, but he died suddenly only a month after their arrival. Aloysia continued in a fairly successful singing career in Vienna over the next 2 decades. On 31 October 1780, she married Joseph Lange, an actor at the theatre in Kentner who was also an amateur painter. He later produced a well-known portrait of Mozart. It was Lange's second marriage after his first wife had died in 1779. Since Aloysia was the main support of her family at the time, Lange agreed to pay her mother an advance of 900 florins and the sum of 700 florins per year on a continuing basis. She moved to the Burgtheater in 1782, singing Italian opera. This position lasted only 8 months, as she soon became persona non grata owing to disagreements over salary and role distribution as well as missed performances. She continued to sing, however, at the Kentner Theatre as well as in occasional roles at the Burgtheater. In 1795, she went on concert tour with her widowed sister Constance. As of that year, she ceased to live with her husband Lange. She spent her old age in Salzburg in order to be near her surviving sisters Constance and Sophie, who had moved there. Her relationship with Mozart. Around 1777, the 21-year-old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart spent some time in Mannheim, where he had hoped in vain, it turned out, to find employment. Mozart undertook to teach Aloysia in singing. This is less implausible than it might seem, since according to Molling, Mozart was himself a trained former soprano, instructed in childhood 1764–1765 by a celebrated castrator, Giovanni Manzioli. Mozart had performed in public as a singer repeatedly up until he was 13, after which perhaps puberty proved a barrier to further performances. Mozart was also an experienced composer of operas, familiar with all aspects of opera production from his journeys to Italy. At the time of this instruction, Aloysia was already a very advanced pupil. Mozart felt that she already commanded an excellent cantabile style, but felt she could use some work on highly virtuosic passages of rapid notes. He wrote to his father, "Weber sings from her heart, and most like singing cantabile. I have brought her through the grand area to the passages, because it is necessary when she comes to Italy for her to sing bravura arias. She will certainly not forget cantabile, because that is her natural inclination." To achieve this end, Mozart taught Aloysia to sing a number of arias that included bravura passages taken from his earlier work in Italy. By Mozart's own account, Aloysia was a very fine pupil, and at the end of the instruction period he wrote a kind of examination piece, the recitative and Ericalen. 294 Alcandro, lo confesso / non so, Don Vien. As Mozart wrote to his father, "When I had it ready, I said to Emil Weber, 'Learn the aria yourself, sing it as you wish. Then let me hear it, and I will tell you honestly what I like and what I don't like.' After 2 days I came, and she sang it to me, accompanying herself. Then I was obliged to admit that she had sung it exactly as I had wanted it and as I would have taught it to her myself. That is now the best aria she has. With it she certainly brings credit on herself wherever she goes." In the course of all this instruction, Mozart fell in love with Emma Weber. He expressed a desire to marry her, though it is not clear exactly how serious his intentions were, or whether they were reciprocated. Mozart left Mannheim for several months for Paris on an unsuccessful job search. On his way back to Salzburg, he passed through Munich, where the increasingly successful Aloysia was by now employed. According to the tale told in Georg Nikolaus von Nissen's draft biography of Mozart, Mozart and Aloysia had a somewhat unpleasant encounter. When he entered, she appeared no longer to know him, for whom she previously had wept. Accordingly, he sat down at the piano and sang in a loud voice, "The one who doesn't want me can lick my ass." The vulgar phrase in Mozart's song corresponds to the English idiom "kiss my ass," and occurs frequently in Mozart's letters. See Mozart and scatology. Mozart himself moved to Vienna in 1781, and later that year was for a time a lodger in the Weber home. The father, Fridolin, had died in 1779, and Aloysia's mother, Aloysia Weber, was taking in boarders to make ends meet. Mozart fell in love with the third daughter, Constance. When the two married in 1782, Mozart became Aloysia's brother-in-law. Apparently there were no long-term hard feelings, as Mozart wrote a fair amount of additional music for Aloysia to sing, listed below. Music written by Mozart for Aloysia Weber. From the Mannheim Visit, recitative and aria for soprano, Kelvin, 294, recitative and aria for soprano, Popoli di Tessaglia, Kelvin, 316/300 EB. This has a range up to G, which earned it a listing in Guinness List as the highest demanded note in the classical repertoire. From the Vienna Years, aria for soprano, Kelvin, 383 scene and rondo, Kelvin, 416, completed in Vienna January 1783 and premiered by Aloysia on the 11th at a concert in the Mail Group, site of the later premiere of many of Mozart's piano concertos. Mozart wrote 2 substitution arias for Aloysia, inserted into a revival production June 1783 at the Burgtheater of Pasquale Amposi's opera Il Curioso Indiscreto. These were Voris Bigove, O Dio, Kelvin 418 and Kelvin 419. The role of Emmy, hers in the show Singspiel der Schauspieldirektor K. 486, consisting of one aria Durchschlag Diebesgestand, a trio, and a vaudeville finale. This occasional piece was written for an elaborate party given by the Emperor Joseph Roman II in February 1786, aria for soprano, Kelvin 538 1788. Mozart opera roles sung by Aloysia Weber. Donna Anna, in Mozart's Don Giovanni at the Vienna premiere of the work, 7 May 1788. Constance, in her revival production of Die Entführung den Serial 1785-1788. Sesto, in a widow's benefit performance of La Clemenza di Tito 1795. Assessment. Joachim Daniel Preisler, a Danish actor and musician, was sent on tour by his employer, the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen, to study opera production in other European countries. While in Vienna he was invited into the land home, where he heard the pregnant and thus not performing Aloysia sing. In his diary he wrote, "The voice is something exceptional, but not by a long way as good as our Müller, yet her high range and her delicacy, her execution, taste and theoretical knowledge cannot fail to be admired by any impartial critic. She can sing the longest and most difficult parts incomparably better than the songstresses who are here pampered by the Viennese nobility." Preisler's testimony also indicates that Aloysia was not just a fine singer, but an outstanding general musician. The well-known Mozart is her brother-in-law, and has taught her so well that she accompanies from a score and plays interludes like a Kapellmeister. In fiction, Mozart's and Aloysia's ill-fated romance is novelized in Mozart's Wife by Juliette Waldron Hard Shell Books, 2000. A somewhat more fanciful portrayal is given in Marrying Mozart by Stephanie Cole, New York, Penguin, 2004.